We present our work, Non-Local Latent Relation Distillation for Self-Adaptive 3D Human Pose Estimation. This work was carried out at the Indian Institute of Science in collaboration with Google Research. Our goal is to estimate 3D pose of highly deformable humans from monocular RGB images. This ill-posed classical inverse problem has diverse applications in human-computer interaction, intelligent driver assistance systems, sports analytics, etc. In this work, we posit the problem as a domain adaptation framework. The prime objective is to transfer the task knowledge from a labeled source domain to an unlabeled target domain. On the left, we show possible labeled source datasets, that is, A synthetic serial or B in Studio Human 3.6. Following this, one can train a fully supervised source model as shown. However, upon deploying the source trained model to different target environments, the models perform suboptimally, thus requiring an effective adaptation training strategy. On the right side, we list the target label requirements in the decreasing order of supervision levels. One must minimize the target label requirements for convenient deployment. Here we discuss the hurdles involved in collecting target annotation. To begin, obtaining 3D pose ground truth usually involves a well-calibrated multi-camera infrastructure or cumbersome IMU sensors. This is difficult to set up in outdoor environments. Alternatively, relying on auxiliary supervision such as 2D pose annotations requires significant manual effort for every novel deployment scenario. It is also unsuitable for convenient deployment. Motivated by this, we aim to realize a self-adaptive framework which does not rely on any form of paired supervision. In this work, we seek answers to the following intriguing questions. First, can we completely move away from paired supervision or auxiliary cues such as multiview or depth? Second, can we develop a self-adaptive framework to avoid the curse of dataset bias, thereby aiming to attain superior cross-domain generalization? To this end, we cast 3D pose learning as a self-supervised adaptation problem. In a nutshell, we aim to transfer the task knowledge from a labeled source domain to a completely unlabeled target. In the proposed setting, we consider access to the following. First, a labeled source dataset, either synthetic, serial, or in Studio Human 3.6 environment. While synthetic data suffers from a huge domain gap, an in-studio dataset consists of limited diversity in terms of pose and background variation. A dataset of unpaired 3D pose sequences from CMU mocap. This is used to constrain predicted pose to follow the real pose distribution. And third, a dataset of unlabeled video sequences from the target domain. Notice the extent of domain gap between the source and target datasets. Here we introduce the datasets and modules involved in our learning steps. We introduce notations of the three datasets. First, a labeled source dataset DS, where XS YS denotes a tuple of a source image paired with its 3D pose annotation. Second, a set of unpaired 3D pose sequences Y tilde. Third, individual frames of the sequence gives us a dataset of unpaired 3D poses represented by Y. Below we show the set of unlabeled video sequences from the target domain represented as X tilde. Following this, we introduce two latent embeddings, that is, pose embedding and motion embedding. Here the pose embedding Z is realized as the latent embedding of an adversarial autoencoder which is trained on the unpaired 3D poses Y. Next, the motion embedding V is learned as the latent embedding of a recurrent autoencoder that operates on the sequence of pose embeddings. Following this, the image to pose inference is carried out via two explicit mappings, viz. Image to latent and latent to pose. Note that the latent to pose mapping DP is the pre-learned pose decoder. Here GS represents the source specific image to latent mapping which is obtained via supervised training on the labeled source dataset DS. After obtaining all the discussed pre-learned modules, our prime objective is to train or adapt the target specific image to latent mapping G on the unlabeled target domain samples. We initialize G from GS and DP is kept frozen. We introduce relation distillation as a means to align the unpaired cross-modal samples, that is, the unpaired target videos and unpaired 3D pose sequences. A relation can be characterized as lower order or higher order based on the number of entities that participate in defining a relationship tuple. For instance, in contrastive learning, a pose-space triplet relation expresses a coupling of just three pose entities: an anchor pose obtained from input image, the corresponding positive obtained from pose invariant image augmentation, and a negative as a completely different pose. This is thus considered a lower ordered relation. However, a similar contrastive triplet defined in the hierarchical motion space, that is temporal pose sequences of fixed sequence length t, would couple 3t pose entities and thus is considered a higher order relation. One intuitive question is, why to use motion embedding when the goal task is to realize an image to pose mapping? The hierarchical motion embedding facilitates a suitable platform to formalize temporally structured higher order relational associations of the pose space entities. Unlike positive coupling in contrastive learning, we introduce non-local relations that couple entities beyond the structural neighborhood, which effectively characterize long-range latent pose interactions. We next show a few examples of non-local relations defined in both pose and motion space. For pose space, we have pose flip, where we flip the image horizontally. A similar pose space transformation would involve swapping the left side joints with that of the right. In plane rotation, where we rotate the images by a certain angle theta, say 50 degrees. Flip plus in-plane rotation involves horizontal flipping followed by an in-plane rotation. Similarly, in the motion space, we have only flip, where we flip each image frame in the sequence horizontally, flip backward, obtained by reversal of the individually flipped frames, only backward, obtained by reversal of the individual frames, slow backward, constructed by sampling the original sequence at 15 fps to enable a temporarily slow 30 fps slow backward video taken from the middle region. And finally, fast forward, constructed by sampling the original sequence at 60 fps to enable a temporarily fast 30 fps fast forward video. We observe that adapting the image to latent mapper G just based on contrastive relations results in poor pose estimation performance. This is because the positive coupling in contrastive based relations is limited to local neighborhoods, as here the positive counterpart of an anchor is obtained via simple pose invariant augmentations. To this end, our goal is to come up with a new set of relational associations with non-local positive couplings. This aims to characterize long-range latent pose interactions, that is, a positive coupling of two entities that are grounded far away in the latent pose or motion space. We thus propose to distill non-local relations via pre-learned relation transformer networks. Relation transformers operating on the pose and motion embeddings are neural network mappings TZ, RZ, and TV, RV, respectively. Here, RZ and RV denote independent embedding specific rule IDs for the pose and motion embeddings, respectively. We define tangible non-local relations separately in the pose and motion space that are categorized under lower order non-local relations and higher order non-local relations, respectively. Here, the corresponding relational energy is devised via the latent space relation transformers. The relational energies aim to preserve the equivariance of higher order spatiotemporal relations between the two modalities as a means to perform the cross-modal alignment. Next, we put forward a trivial question: what makes non-local relations more effective? We hypothesize that relations coupling diverse samples lead to better cross-modal alignment. To evaluate this hypothesis, we define a distance metric to apprehend the extent of non-localness of individual relations, which is termed as latent distance. Figure A shows grid interpolation of pose embedding and a bar plot comparing relations, clearly highlights the gap in the degree of non-localness between pose flip and in-plane rotation. This supports our observation of negligible performance improvement where using local relations on top of non-local relations. Figure B shows grid interpolation of speed of the generated motions with latent distance bar plot comparing the non-local motion relations. We perform a similar metric analysis to select the best set of relations defined on the motion space. Finally, in figure C, we show 2D PCA projected motion embedding points with glances of the anchor video, middle point, and the corresponding transformed videos obtained by operating over various motion related non-local relation candidates. Note that only the relations in blue are selected because of their high non-localness. In a nutshell, we propose a cross-modal alignment technique to align the learned representations from two diverse modalities. Our unsupervised technique allows adaptation to the wildest unlabeled samples gathered from the web, while initializing the base model on substantially diverse but unrealistic serial. We analyze the importance of higher order non-local relations that characterize long-range latent-pose interactions, unlike general contrastive relations where positive couplings are limited to a local neighborhood structure. Please refer to our paper for more details. Moving on to the experiments, we prepare Rs S2H that uses the synthetic serial dataset as the source and unpaired human 3.6 as the target. We perform a thorough analysis on the standard human 3.6 dataset to compare our performance against the prior state of the art methods. When compared to unsupervised prior arts, Rs S2H achieves SOTA performance on the human 3.6 testset. We outperform Kundu and others who use an additional YouTube dataset. Next, we show our performance in a semi-supervised setting, Rs S2H semi, which uses target adaptation supervision on a small subset of labeled samples, outperforms several semi-supervised prior arts. We even perform Iqbal and others who use multi-view supervision and the labeled MPI dataset for semi-supervised results. Lastly, when evaluated on 3DPW dataset, Rs S2W, which uses the synthetic serial dataset as the source and an in-house web dataset as the target, yields performance comparable to prior arts without any supervision on real data. Whereas Rs SH2W outperforms the prior arts by a significant margin with a PA-MPJP of 72.1. Next, we demonstrate the effectiveness of each of individual relational energies towards realizing a better unsupervised alignment through an ablative experiment. Starting with the source-trained image-to-latent module, we gradually add the loss functions and their corresponding network components used for the adaptation. The source pre-training uses the image-to-latent G and the frozen pose decoder DP. Using a contrastive loss in the latent embedding output by G leads to a slight improvement in performance. We notice a further improvement when we use the hierarchical higher order contrastive learning term LHCR defined in the motion space encoded by EM. Next, we notice that using non-local relations for adaptation yields a sharp increase in performance. Using L1Z is the lower order non-local relation, flip plus in plane 50 requires the addition of the pose space transformer T1Z. L1B is the higher order non-local relation, flip backward plus in plane 50, which uses a transformer in the motion space T1V. L2V is the second higher order non-local relation, slow backward, whose corresponding motion space transformer is T2V. In conclusion, this experiment validates our hypothesis that the relations that couple diverse samples lead to better cross-modal alignment, which aids the selection of the most effective relation set. Moving on to qualitative results, our model yields accurate poses on 3DPW dataset, the LSP dataset, and the web dataset. This demonstrates the generalizability of our model to in-the-wild scenarios with just in-studio and synthetic supervision. In summary, we present a cross-modal alignment technique to align the learned representations from two diverse modalities, images and poses. The described higher order relations operating in motion space couple many entities, resulting in a better cross-modal alignment compared to general contrastive relations. Unlike general contrastive learning, our non-local relations couple entities beyond the structural neighborhood, which results in a further improvement in adaptation performance, yielding SOTA performance on standard benchmarks like Human 3.6, 3DHP, and 3DPW. Finally, we provide an objective metric, the latent distance, in order to select the most effective relation set for adaptation to unlabeled targets. Please visit our project page for more details and complete results. Thank you.